Being a starter main is quite an interesting phenomenon. You start out playing them because you have no other characters to use, and then you begin to obtain a few other characters from your wishes, and yet you still keep on making excuses to attain that one free character, and you continue to postpone benching them until you realize they're already max leveled and triple crowned. The crazy thing is that's actually happened to me twice already. I mean, it's hard to resist showering them with endless amounts of love, resin, and star glitter when they have such intriguing personalities. I mean, I know they don't appeal to everyone, but apparently a highly educated yet adorable mage and a cunning strategic observant and secretive government official were enough to reel me in. So now my goal is to shove them down your throats to get you to appreciate them. Although today, I'm going to be focusing on our lovely librarian, Miss Lisa Minci. It's no secret that Lisa is characterized as someone who's smart, with her being an esteemed graduate from the prestigious Sumeru academia. However, it can also be said that her intellect isn't really apparent at first glance, since she's more interested in afternoon tea and naps. On one hand, this can seem to detract from her characterization, but I personally find this depiction of a smart person to be very interesting, since it's quite similar to what I encounter more often in the real world. I feel that oftentimes smart characters in movies and TV shows tend to be written in a very in-your-face manner, like they have to spew obscure facts every time they open their mouths, and they barely have any other hobbies aside from what are considered as intellectual pursuits, such as reading. Although I know Lisa does read a lot, but I feel like she does it with a very casual attitude now. These depictions can be quite simplistic, annoying, and unrelatable, and they also seem to make intellectualism seem unattainable and performative. So that's why I appreciate how Lisa's smartness is presented more subtly, rather than having her talk about rare chemicals every single time we see her. Of course, she does lack exposure in the main plot, so that might be one reason why her smartness is not exactly obvious. But as someone who enjoys reading character profiles and pays attention to story quests or event quests, I can say that discovering little pieces of her intellectuality feels like stumbling upon gold. For example, I distinctly remember how in the latter part of Jean's story quest, Lisa casually tells her that she took over her auditing job for the day, as if accounting subjects aren't notorious for making students shed enough tears to form hydromimics. She spoke as if going through the Dawn Winery's accounts was no big deal for her, like it was just another little chore for her, and that shows that she's really no joke. And aside from that, there are several allusions to her skills, such as her having a potion-making passive, her talking about the medicinal properties of calla lilies, her fondness for conducting experiments, and the mere fact that she thinks 800 pages isn't a lot. That means that in a short amount of time, she could probably go through around 2.5 classics, read 40 peer-reviewed journal articles, or browse through Yanfei's entire law encyclopedia. Even the fact that she's so often consulted for random questions and advice is indicative of her vast knowledge. I also personally appreciate how her character taps into her systematic and logical thinking when she addresses certain issues, like when she thought of applying elemental traces to the books to allow her to find them once they get lost or stolen, when she directed several alchemists just to create a precise heating cauldron to save time on making tea, or even when she meticulously compiled notes on the Blackfire incident that occurred in the webtoon. These all go to show that she's someone who makes use of her knowledge when necessary, using it to improve the quality of the lives of Mondstadters, rather than simply putting it on for show, so it makes her more well-rounded. And I must admit that I enjoy the concept of the unassuming sweet girl sitting quietly in the corner of the room, who for some reason can solve any calculus problem you present to her, but won't say anything too big-brain unless you ask. It makes it seem as though her knowledge is like a well with a depth that's difficult to estimate just by looking into it. Besides, the pursuit of knowledge does always come at a cost. In the lore of Genshin, the cost might be represented by specific consequences, care of whatever higher power there is. But aside from that, even in real life, learning and investigation always requires a significant amount of time and effort, to the point that it could affect one's well-being. So when you're seeking to hone your intellect, you also have to think about the extent to which your endeavor will be worthwhile. And I think Lisa has already thought about it deeply and extensively. However, one setback to her intellectualism might be her supposed laziness. But the thing is, ever since I played her story quest, which was around the time I started truly getting attached to her, I've always thought of her laziness as something good-natured. Of course, she doesn't necessarily love work, but her laziness is barely a hindrance to her when it comes to doing things properly. In fact, she doesn't seem to shy away from going the extra mile, considering she stayed up late with Jean in the webtoon to help her work on the recent Blackfire incident. She went on patrol with Jean during the Windbloom Festival, and yes, I searched that up because I wasn't playing yet at the time. And she also apparently was made in charge of Mondstadt when both Jean and Kaya visited the Golden Apple Archipelago in 1.6. One of her character stories even explains that she took on the task of being a librarian because she feels that this is something of great importance to her, hinting at a sense of meticulousness and responsibility. So while she is lazy, she's clearly not someone who tries to avoid all kinds of work, especially if her expertise is highly required for the task. I think she just wants to put effort into things that she truly values, rather than working hard for its own sake. Because I think that lots of times, work can be quite romanticized in many cultures, like with the prevalence of hustle culture online. It's like you have to earn your value as a person through working tirelessly, and being hardworking becomes a way to signal your merit to others. In her case, it seems like she prefers turning her attention to pursuits which satisfy her and give her a sense of purpose, instead of forcing herself to work on everything, especially when there are other people to help her. I see this as a form of boundary setting because she doesn't let her work engulf her life beyond a point that's acceptable to her. It's why she essentially has a 9-to-5 job rather than something which would require her to work at irregular times. And it's not like Lisa's completely idle aside from her library work because she likes doing experiments every now and then. I mean, one of her favorite teapot sets is the Secret Research Lab, and she uses the Alchemist's office, and she also wants to use the interrogation room for her experiments, but Hertha, the reputation girl, is too stubborn to let it go, so all Lisa can do is roll her eyes. She even does a lot of reading in her spare time, and that can be considered intellectual work, because reading comprehension requires effort even when you're just sitting in one place. In fact, one of Lisa's treasure chest opening lines is,
노력한 보람이 있네.
And in the other Asian dubs, what she says is closer to the work was worth the effort or my work was rewarded, something along those lines. It goes to show that she does see the importance of work, but it has to feel satisfying, fruitful, and also yield good results. Don't get me wrong though, this isn't supposed to be a jab at the other characters who are overworked. I myself do adore the likes of Jean, Noelle, and others. It's just that for them, service ranks high in their list of values, and they find a great sense of purpose in fulfilling tons of duties for the organizations they work for, and that makes work more satisfying for them. But that value system doesn't necessarily need to be held by everyone, and it doesn't mean that anyone who isn't as hardworking as them automatically doesn't care about their work. You can see even Jean herself has a high regard for the work put in by Lisa because of its undeniable quality and helpfulness, even though she doesn't really work as tirelessly, because from what I see, when she does fulfill a certain task, she really doesn't cut corners. Her supposed laziness also contributes to her creative problem-solving and rather cunning behavior, which greatly assists her in addressing important concerns of the people who need her help. In her first story quest, this kind of thinking even resulted in her creating a solution for a future problem, which was to put elemental traces on books so as to track them when they get lost or stolen. So by the time she encountered the problem, she already had the tools to address the situation. I'd even argue that people in Mondstadt are able to see the value and effort put into Lisa's intellectual work, because for them the results can be quite palpable. But regardless, sometimes effortlessly smart characters are appealing to the audience because of their sheer coolness and unfazed attitude towards tackling quantum physics, and I think having a classy woman like her embody this trope is also quite fun. There may not be that much Lisa content in fandom spaces, but I do often see fanarts of her being depicted as Razor's honorary mom, which never fail to be wholesome and adorable. She really does come across as very sweet and caring, not only to her mentee Razor but also to Jean and the Traveler. She's also described as someone whose helpfulness comes hand in hand with the sheer amount of knowledge she has. She's helpful because of her various intellectual capabilities, which she allows other people to benefit from. However, it's also very clear that she's not someone who can manage to be sweet all the time. In her story quest, she starts off getting pissed as she remembers the overdue books she has to collect, and her frustration reaches a point where she even beats an abyss mage to a pulp. With magic, of course. And because of this, whenever I see people using Lisa to fight against the Oceanid, which she is extremely good at, by the way, you should try asking Lisa Main for help if you're struggling with the birds, I tend to see comments saying that she's mad at the Oceanid because it forgot to return a book. Kaya, another all-time favorite character of mine, even mentions that he himself has experienced the consequence of her wrath simply because he forgot to return a book once. And if I'm reading that voice line correctly, I don't think he's even a repeat offender at all, which makes this even funnier. And for the record, I absolutely love this dynamic. This is peak Knight of Favonius shenanigans. I love it. Also, aside from overdue books, Lisa gets mad at people who are misbehaving, as evidenced by her electrocuting drunkards during the Windbloom Festival, to the point that Jean had to tell her off rather sassily, and that's quite rare for Jean to do, I'd say. The point is, I find her sweetness and her aggression or her strictness are blended together in a very interesting way, and I think it goes to show that she's someone who values other people's well-being, and at the same time, she's very particular about rules and proper conduct to the point where she won't hesitate to put violators in place. This same meticulousness is seen in her work ethic, as I've mentioned earlier, and it's also the reason why she expects a lot more from the people around her. But at the same time, she's clearly not arrogant, and she doesn't look down on people in general, so she's still able to show respect and kindness to Mondstadt citizens. That makes her an excellent administrator, and the Knights of Favonius are extremely lucky to have her affiliated with them, and she's clearly not someone to mess with. I think those are the reasons why Mondstadters tend to have a high regard for her. I mean, if you were to check the Mondstadt characters' voice lines about her, they're mostly positive. Except for Eula's, but her second character story suggests that she still does have a friendship with Lisa, sort of, if you can call it that. These voice lines tend to speak of her as someone who gives sound advice, as mentioned by Sucrose and Albedo, someone who is reliable, as hinted at by Jean and Diluc, someone who's sweet, as mentioned by Diona and Klee, as well as someone who has a lot of interesting stories, according to Amber. And fun fact, Barbara apparently thinks she could become an idol, so that's something. And I know this sounds weird, but I personally imagine her as some kind of trot singer because of her strong auntie vibes. This means a lot, especially in Mondstadt, where the people interact with each other more often and are more familiar with each other. So lots of the time, their opinions on their fellow citizens are based on first-hand experiences. So Lisa's high approval in the city isn't a result of overhype, but these are based on her tangible contributions to society. In the webtoon, we see that she's sent by Jean to interview Diluc regarding his possible involvement in the latest incident. Although Diluc quickly becomes closed off and defensive, he eventually yields to the interrogation. I guess some readers might interpret this as being a result of Lisa's charm, but I don't think Diluc is someone who's easily charmed, and it's even possible that charm would have the opposite effect on him. And besides, some Chinese speakers on Twitter are hinting at there being a mistranslation with one of Lisa's lines in the comics, making it sound more sus than it actually should have been. Just PSA. I personally thought that what persuaded him to open up was Lisa claiming that she just wanted to solve the case so that they could go back to their regular lives after that. Because the thing about Diluc, if you read the webtoon, is that he'd experienced harsh disillusionment upon seeing the corruption, incompetency, and selfishness of some of the knights, which brought him to great frustration that eventually led him to resign. So now he's doubtful about the integrity of the knights as an institution, even though they do definitely have some good members. In their conversation, I think she was able to appeal to his sense of integrity by expressing her desire for seeking the truth rather than doing this for the sole purpose of turning him into a scapegoat, or trying to close the case as fast as possible to project a sense of accomplishment for the knights. I believe that this incident highlights Lisa's perceived credibility as a knight affiliate in Mondstadt, because people think highly of her intentions and find her reliable, to the point that even someone as grumpy as Diluc would end up trusting her with the story of his past. Now that I'm done sharing my general thoughts on her, purposely omitting the annoying jokes and speculations the fandom makes about her, and yes, she will electrocute you if you bring this up in the comments. So I'm going to move on to sharing thoughts about her character that are interesting but sort of random. These will all be restricted to my knowledge of her based on canon, because extrapolations based on canon, but not exactly canon, would fall under headcanon's territory, and that's for another video entirely.
오늘은 외출하기가 좀 그래. 내가 어제도 이렇게 말했나? 천둥이 치고 비가 오는 날의 훈련은 효과가 2배라고. 뻥이야? 이런 장갑이 구멍나겠어.
I think it's so cool that she almost became one of the captains of the Knights, but she went like, meh, too tiring. Nim, the current captain of the 8th Company, used to question if her academic background would suit the position, but after they sparred with each other using magic, it turns out Lisa's actually extremely overqualified. I really love how she's a unique kind of librarian character because she goes beyond the stereotype of them being old and overly strict. Well, she is strict, but not in a grumpy sort of way. I honestly do think librarians need more respect, and their stereotypical depictions in the media don't seem to help with that, so I'm glad she's doing something to help with their reputation. I absolutely adore her method of spellcasting in combat because she really gives me Tesla Coil vibes, especially with her burst. Her normal attacks are unique in that the lightning is transmitted to the enemies quickly, where it looks like the lightning connects her hand to the enemies, so I feel like it really mimics how lightning looks and behaves realistically. Her attacks have that conductive quality to it, making her spellcasting look very scientific. It's a nice contrast to someone like Yae Miko, who is also an electrocatalyst but uses spirit foxes instead, so we have both scientific and fantastical depictions of lightning. She really is a menace for asking the traveler to taste her magic potions, but it's fine because when we ask her to craft potions for us, they usually end up buffing our characters anyway. Her love for tea is so wholesome, and during the bartending event, I accurately predicted that she'd ordered some kind of tea drink, and the tea recipe she chose was called Love Poem, which is a super cute caramel milk tea, and I think it reflects her personality a lot because Miss Ma'am, you're sweeter than Love Poem even with extra caramel added already. I really wish we'd see her in the Favonius library every time we entered, even if her only lines would just be shushing us up. Or she doesn't even need to have any lines at all. She could just read and I'd take tons of pictures with her. The way she turns the sky purple when she holds her E will never stop being epic. Even her expression looks very intense while she does it. I love it so much. So yeah, I hope now you understand how this one character managed to convince me to max her out, make her my Genshin DP, buy merch for her, and look at her the way she looks at her magic little glows. I don't ask everyone to love her because we all have our own tastes, but what I do ask for is more cons and that student skin that she might get someday. And I also ask people to forgive me if I struggle to shut up about her because she really is my queen of all time. Hopefully, we'll get more content about her soon, and I wish to share more headcanons I have about her someday.
이건 게으름을 피우는 게 아니야. 모두 가장 효율적으로 목표를 달성하길 원하잖아.
That's all for today, and thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.